Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Today we'll be discussing the acronym Rtfm. Now, what does Rtfm stand for? Well, according to the Arch Wiki, it stands for Read the Friendly Manual. But if you were to ask an Arch user, it stands for Read the Effing Manual. And so not only are you wrong, you also come off as rude, condescending, and pompous. Not to mention that it's also mean-spirited and off-putting towards users. And so here I have some reasons why it's not always a good idea to tell someone to Rtfm. The first reason is that even though the Arch Wiki is one of the best pieces of documentation out there, it is by no means perfect. Just take a look at the Arch Linux installation guide. Nowhere in there does it say anything about account creation, nor does it give you a man page to tell you how to do it from the installation guide. And you would think that that's important considering that it is part of the installation guide. But my point is that although it's not the worst thing in the world, there's improvements that could be made upon when it comes to the man pages. And when you tell someone to Rtfm, you're telling them how to read, not how to do it. Just think of it this way. A lot of people aren't born with the intuition and capacity to retain what it is that they're reading. And some people are like me and just dyslexic. But either way, they're not going to be doing it every day, and therefore it won't go into their long-term memory. So they're not going to remember how to do it. They're just going to remember to go read a page. And sometimes things would just be a lot quicker if you just told someone how to do something, instead of telling them to go read something. It's wasted effort to tell someone to go read something when you have the knowledge and could tell someone how to do it. It can also be used as a form of gatekeeping. One example of how Arch Linux users gatekeep is that I had someone tell me that if I use the Arch install script, that I probably shouldn't be using Arch Linux. And that is further from the truth, because I've actually done a legitimate install of Arch Linux. And I don't want to do that every single time, so I want something more automated. Thus, we have the Arch install script. And also, whenever you're reading the guide, you can mess up a couple of times. And I don't want to spend hours trying to correct something when I could have just did it with a script. In fact, that's what a lot of advanced users do anyway. They just make their own script on how to install Arch. So why even complain about the fact that someone's using an Arch install script? And this all leads to elitism, in which you think that you're better than another Linux user just because you used Arch, just because you learned how to install something difficult. But according to you guys, it's not that difficult. Just read the man pages. But again, as I said before, the Arch Wiki, although it's one of the best pieces of documentation, it's not perfect. You're not going to find everything, but you're going to find a pretty good bit there. I will not lie about that. And I say all that to say this. You're not being helpful if you tell someone to Rtfm. You may think you're being helpful, but all you're doing is just teasing someone with the fact that you know more than them. You could be helpful and give someone that insight that you have, but instead you take that away by just telling them to go read the effing manual. And that's cruel and hurtful, which again leads back into elitism. Now let's read the Arch Wiki and see how all of my reasons can be applied to this simple section of the Arch terminology. So, as we already discussed, Arch Wiki says that the Rtfm stands for Read the Friendly Manual, not Read the Effing Manual, which goes back to my point about how you're mean-spirited and it's off-putting towards users. This simple message is replied to a lot of new Linux/Arch users who ask about the functionality of a program when it is clearly defined in the program's manual. Just as I defined earlier, the documentation is not perfect. This acronym is an invitation to self-care, not an insult. I would go out on a limb and say that Arch themselves may not be using it as an insult. Arch users, on the other hand, are a different story, and a lot of them are doing this in bad faith. But what do you mean by self-care? Do you mean a day at the spa? Or do you mean someone's mental health? Because if you mean someone's mental health, this does nothing for their mental health. If anything, it makes it worse, because then they don't want to ask questions ever again, because they're going to be in that constant fear that they're going to get the same treatment as they got from an Arch user for just asking a question. And that does a lot to someone's mental health. The fact that you couldn't be bothered to help someone in need. It is often used when a user is seen as failing to make any attempt to find a solution to the problem themselves. So I get your point, and those people do exist, but that is not everyone. Just like vocal Arch users are a minority, so are lazy people. And in saying this, a lot of people have made several attempts to find a solution to the problem that they're having. Oftentimes, people like myself, we could spend hours trying to figure out what the answer is. I've spent as much as 3 days working on a solution to a problem before. I'm not limited to 3 days, but I say that because my point is that I've spent a lot of time trying to find the solution to my problem. So again, there are those people that are lazy and don't want to do it themselves, but then there's also people who try really hard to find the answers and can't find anything. If someone tells you this, they are not trying to offend you. They are just feeling frustrated with a perceived lack of effort. So 2 points here is that a lot of the Arch users that say Rtfm, they are trying to offend you, which goes back into the elitism because they simply think that they're better than you. And to my second point, if you're feeling that frustrated, you don't have to answer them. In fact, not answering someone would actually be better than telling them to Rtfm. But you feel like you have to answer to someone, and thus you do. Why not just go touch some grass? The best thing to do if you're told to do this is to read the manual page, which a lot of people do. That's one of the first things they do. To read the program manual page for a particular program named program-name, type this at the command line, man program-name. Now, that is actually going to be helpful for me because I like knowing that I have more options when looking for the man pages. If you do not find the answer to your question in the program manual, there are more ways to find the answer. You can search the wiki, which is what a lot of people do. Search the forum, which is something that I do. I try to look to see if someone else has answered my question before I go do something. Search the mailing list. Yeah, I wouldn't personally do that. And search the web, which is something that I do all the time. I look through Reddit, I look through a bunch of other forums that I can't think of right off the top of my head, but I do search for that stuff. So then you may be asking me, Zipix, what do I do if I can't tell people to Rtfm? Well, there's 2 things you can do. You can either not respond, or you can be helpful by sharing your insight with them. If you choose not to respond, this would be a good time to touch some grass because you're obviously feeling frustrated with a perceived lack of effort according to your standards. If you are going to be helpful, however, tell them how to do it, and if they still proceed to show their ignorance, even after explaining thoroughly, then I would just leave it at that. And with that, I use Arch, by the way. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and I shall see you guys in the next video.